Welcome to New Hours and Power Hour. I'm Serena, your host, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. We are coming from sunny Puerto Rico to talk with you. We're at the New York State annual legislative conference, SOMOS, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to spend some time talking with a dear friend and colleague, Erin George, who is the National Policy Director for the Bail Project. We got a lot to talk about today, so we're really excited to get started. So I'm here with Erin George from the Bail Project, which is a national nonprofit. She's going to tell us a whole lot more. And most importantly, she's a dear friend. And we have dogs that love each other.
They do. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Really happy to have you. So first of all, tell me why bail reform and all of the issues around carceral issues, why you're so passionate about this and why it's meaningful to you in your life and how long you've been doing this.
Yeah. I think that I come to this work and the work I've done my whole life. As you know, I didn't come into advocacy and legislative work as my first career. I'm a social worker by training, and I did direct service work first. And I think I often arrive at issues because I see them arise in my own personal life. So the direct service work that I did when I was working with young people at the intersections of mental health, was due to mental health issues that I saw and was experiencing in my own family. And this is very similar, right? The issues of cash bail, the issues of the criminal justice system. I have family members who have been incarcerated. I was also seeing the issues that the criminal justice system was causing in the lives of clients. I was seeing the ways that generational trauma caused by the criminal justice system was impacting the young people that I was working with in residential mental health facilities. But most significantly, my younger brother, who I'm very close to, has been in and out of jail and prison for many years. He was first arrested when he was under 18, but continued to be arrested and spent time in jail and prison from 18 on until his early 30s, and cash bail played a prominent role in that incarceration. And as a family member, it's to a large degree been my mother and myself. It's a very challenging experience to have cash bail assigned. As you know, my family, I'm from California. California has the highest bails in the country on average.
Is that right?
Higher. Yes.
So cash bail, when we talk about this issue, we think about the person who allegedly committed the crime. But maybe we're not talking about what's most important, how this impacts families. You have to come up with a lot of money.
Yeah.
In order to get your loved one out of prison or jail.
Yes.
Out of jail.
Yes, and I think that's such a good point, right? And it's another part of the reason that this issue has really captured my interest and why I think it's so critical. It's an intercept in the criminal justice system that seems small. It's a single moment. Oftentimes bail setting is happening literally within seconds, if not minutes. But the cascading impacts are so enormous within, obviously, primarily the person who has been arrested and charged but not convicted. And that cash bail might mean that they spend days, weeks, months, or years incarcerated, as you know, pretrial. It means the outcomes of their case are much more likely to be bad, right? They're much more likely to be convicted. It means they're much more likely to face trauma, but it also means that their family members are likely to be the people that either have to try to scrounge up the money directly, which very many people can't afford, or they have to be the people that try to come up with the 10% for a bondsman. They have to be the co-signers. And they are also often the people who then have to deal with the economic impacts of not having another working family member or contributor. They have to figure out, hey, how do I get my kids to school when I have one less adult in the home to be able to take the kids to school? So it's this one intercept that has just huge ripple effects on families and communities. That's one less person that's there, to be able to go to work.
So why is it that if you stay in jail while waiting for your trial, waiting for your case to be adjudicated, waiting for the outcome, maybe you're innocent, maybe you're going to be convicted, maybe you're going to take a plea, whether you're innocent or guilty, why is it more likely that you will be convicted just because you don't have the money to get out on bail?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question, and it's not something that I learned about till I started doing policy work, right? And so I shifted from doing direct service work to doing policy work because I was seeing all these huge problems in my brother's life and seeing these problems with clients. And so I've been doing policy work for almost 15 years now, and a lot of that has been on cash bail and discovery and speedy trial. And it's so fascinating that even having a brother who's been in and out and other family members, it wasn't until I got into this work that I started to learn that across the country, upwards of 90% of cases end in a plea deal, right? The vast majority end in a plea deal. And to a large degree, that's because if you think it through, right, you are incarcerated pretrial. And again, on any given day, there are 500,000 people across the country who are sitting in jail, not because they've been convicted, but because they've been arrested. The vast majority of that 500,000 there because they're on unaffordable cash bail. And so you're posed with the option of like, okay, so, you can't afford your bail, right? You're there. You're posed with the option of like, we can give you a plea deal. You can plead down. We've arrested you for, a felony. You can plead to a misdemeanor. You can get out. You can go home tomorrow. You can make your kid lunch. You can take them to school. So people plead guilty
just to get out.
Just to get home. And then another huge reason is that people don't have access to their attorneys, right? So say that they don't plead out or they wait and they don't plead out immediately. You don't have the same access to your attorney when you're incarcerated that you do when you're home. You don't have the same ability to meaningfully participate in your case. You don't have the ability to see the information about the case against you or the lack of information.
You're literally being held captive without any access to people who may have key details about how to fight your case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this when I was 20 years old. My family couldn't afford the $50,000 bail at that time. And I sat in administrative segregation, which is solitary confinement. The worst period of time I did was spending that time isolated. You can't regularly call your attorney. Sometimes attorneys don't pick up.
Yeah.
Other times we'd have to collect at the time for collect calls, and your attorney might be in court. You have so little access to resources. But tell me more about why this work is meaningful on a national level versus a state level, because we've had conversations about rollbacks to bail, about what offenses should be included. New York, all about New York bail and what we've been kind of trying to hold the ground on, and what some offenses are considered bail eligible or not. But the truth is, you make bail if you have the money.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you'd asked me 6 years ago, I would have told you I was never going to move into national work. I love the work that I did in New York. I love being on the ground. I think that people and organizing are the fuel of movements. They should be the fuel of movements. They should be the fuel of advocacy. And that doesn't have to change when you move to national work. That should always be the fuel. I'm proud of the work that we did together, that New Hour, played such a leading core role on bail reform in New York. And I remain proud of the work that I did in that. When the opportunity arose for me to shift into national bail reform work, I felt like it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. I had been fortunate to be able to do some work and be in some collaboration with the advocates that worked on the Illinois effort, advocates that had worked in California, and I see a really important role for national organizations to be weaving a narrative that expands beyond individual states. The responsibility of local and state-based organizers and advocates is to bring their people home. And that's what we did in New York. I almost started crying 2 weeks ago when that new study came out that showed that jails are still decarcerating across the state, and actually public safety has improved in New York City or stayed stable across the state despite what people are seeing in the media and in the press. We have the data to show we did what we set out to do. And that was our job as New York State advocates. But there's a narrative to connect, and there's advocates to connect to one another. That's an important role that national groups can play. And we can't leave people in red states behind where it may be harder to advance bail reform, or it may take a lot of incremental or iterative work to build towards it, because cash bail doesn't discriminate based on how people are voting at the ballot box. Cash bail discriminates based on how much money you have in your bank account. That is it. And so when the opportunity arose for me to be able to partner with state advocates in places like Oklahoma and Texas and Florida and really learn about what the strategies are there and to help bolster those efforts, I jumped at it.
I mean, amazing, and you certainly are the right person for the job.
Well, you're too kind.
But it strikes me as we're talking about this, we've had many conversations about this, but this, even though we think of this as a carceral issue, right? An issue related to crime and punishment and justice, it's actually an economic issue. It's if I have the money, I can go home.
Yeah.
If I'm a billionaire, I'm not likely to spend a day behind bars until I'm convicted.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not convicted, I'm acquitted.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that during bail rollbacks and all of this messaging that happened in New York State and across the country, how is it that the everyday New Yorker is thinking that the most heinous crimes are going to now be people who are alleged to have committed heinous crimes are going to be out on the streets because of bail?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did that become the message?
Yeah, it's a really challenging narrative to unwind, and I'd be remiss if I didn't name that in large part, I think that it is due to the fact that we are one of two countries in the entire world that has a commercial bail bond industry. So we have private corporate interests that are that have vested interests in maintaining a cash bail system, because they can only make money and continue to thrive when cash bail systems exist. So these are the companies that charge the 10 to 20% to family members or individuals when so that they can get out. So when I get arrested,
yeah, how does that work with the? So this is an interesting thing, because we've had moms come through our doors, women at New Hour, families, and the grandparents or the spouse will call us, or the loved one will say, "I have to pay X amount of dollars. Mm-hmm. Let's say it's $50,000." But then there's all these other fees, mm-hmm. and they don't get that back.
Yeah.
So bondsmen are making money off the families of yep. people who are dealing with the system. How is that possible? That they're making so much money.
That's exactly right. And then I want to tell you a little bit about the non-policy work that the Bail Project does, which is really flipping this on its head. But that's exactly right. So say that I get arrested and my bail is $100,000 and you don't have $100,000, which obviously the vast majority of us don't have. And so you call a bail bonds person who says, if you can come out with $10,000, again, unrealistic here. So let's decrease it. Let's say that I got arrested and my bail is $10,000.
Sure.
Right? $10,000. They say, if you give me $1,000, non-refundable, we will bail Erin out if she comes to all of her court dates, and you make sure that Serena, you make sure that Erin's coming to all her court dates. You're making sure that she's not getting rearrested. You're making sure she's complying with all the terms of her release. As the case moves forward, then you're all good. Sign here.
Do I get my $1,000?
You don't get your $1,000 back. So they thrive on cash bail existing so that they can continue to make money, which is why this narrative remains, because they put money behind these campaigns.
So it's a big business.
It is a big business. Money gets put behind these these campaigns to attack cash bail reforms.
So bail bondsmen want to stay in business, and they lobby to make sure the messaging is such that people are afraid.
Correct. Because when you really get down to the heart of it, bail reform is not some radical idea. What we're talking about is very logical, right? The system that exists right now is what is illogical. The system that exists right now says when you're arrested, the basis upon which you're released or not is how much money you have. It does not matter whether or not you pose a risk of not returning to court. Doesn't matter whether you pose a risk to public safety. It's a pay-to-play system. If you can pay, you can be released. If you can't, you stay in jail, even though you've not been convicted.
That seems very unfair.
It's very unfair, and it flies in the face of
justice,
a core principle that we've been told since we were children, right? That we're presumed innocent until we are found guilty. It like flies in the face of cornerstone democracy, right? And so what bail reform is saying is you should have evidence, some evidence be the basis for the decision if we're going to do something that is so serious, to deprive someone of their liberty before they have been found guilty of a crime. You walked out your front door. Say you walk out your front door tomorrow, you get arrested. Do you want the basis for being incarcerated before you've been found guilty to be how much money is in your bank account? Or do you want it to be that there's some evidence and a judge has to write down why they're depriving you of your liberty? I think most people would say, I'd like there to be some evidence that I did the thing I'm being accused of, not do you have X amount of dollars in your bank account?
I find this so interesting because if we had these conversations with everyday people, most people would agree that this just doesn't feel fair. But I also think that there are people who feel as though if you've been alleged to have committed a crime, you therefore should not have the option to be free until your case is adjudicated. And it's interesting because people think that until it happens to their family member.
Exactly. Until it happens to their family member. And, it's the work at the Bail Project is we're really aiming to unwind that by putting stories out there, right? So our client-based work and the direct service work that many of my colleagues do, we provide free bail assistance to low-income people. So imagine what the bail bonds people do, but take out the profit motive. So we pay bail for people. We don't ask people to put any of their money on the line. We don't ask them to sign any dotted line. So let's go back to the situation where I got arrested, $10,000. You get to call the Bail Project, right? And the Bail Project does an interview to make sure, there's a process for intake, right? But then they pay the $10,000. So the Bail Project pays the $10,000. The Bail Project also provides free transportation to and from court, free court reminders. In the intake process, they figure out if there are any voluntary services or supports that I want. And if we happen to have partners in our network, wherever the site is, we've got sites across the country, we'll make that connection. If I'm interested in, some sort of educational program and we happen to have connections with a service provider, they'll make that connection. And we've served over 35,000 people across the country who returned to 93% of their court dates. So all of this is evidence that flies in the face of the myth that having money on the line is necessary for someone to return to court, or that it is necessary for someone to safely return to court.
I think a lot about some of the women who have experienced being both in the jail and then out on bail. And one of the young women said to me, every day I was in jail, I experienced PTSD. The doors would slam. I'm a survivor of abuse. When she was out on bail, because she was eventually granted bail, she was able to get therapy. She was able to come to our office and receive services. She was able to reunify with her mom, and she got a job. And all of this while she was figuring out how to sort of rectify some of the things in her life that had gone wrong in terms of substance use disorder. So what would you say is the sort of most important thing that people should know when we're talking about state state laws versus national? Is it that national laws can do more, that they're more impactful, that they cover more more area? Like what is the sort of difference there?
So it's interesting because I think there's an ecosystem, right? So federal laws only apply to the federal system, actually. Um, to a large degree, criminal justice policy in general is decided by the states. You could probably say it's like 90% of criminal justice policy across the country happens at the state level, which is why it's so important that state groups are really setting the agenda and national groups are supporting and sharing information about what's happening in other states and, getting embedded. Like we embed in coalitions in the same way that I was working in New York when that is what's needed there. But there are really important ways that the federal government can impact state policy. And some of it is what we're hearing and seeing right now, which is there are very important funding streams that the government provides, that the federal government provides. And those can be incentives. That can also be the restriction of the restricting of funding. And so some of the threats that have been coming out of the administration right now have been threats to pull funding from states that have passed cash bail reforms. There are limitations and restrictions on what funding streams can be pulled or not. To large degree, the funding streams that there's legal authority to impact are the very funding streams that go to public safety programs, victim services programs, violence interruption programs, law enforcement training programs. And so it's a really dangerous approach to try to tamper with state policy in this way, but it also flies in the face of anything that would be logical to threaten to cut funding from the very programs that are supposed to be supporting public safety.
So the federal government pulling back on funding to states to basically pull the lever of, hey, I don't like what you're doing in your state, and I'm going to pressure you into doing what I want by pulling funding from the federal government that would literally create programs to ultimately create public safety the way that we envision it.
It's ironic. Yeah, that's the threat right now. It hasn't happened. And again, I think this is to your question about like where the impact is. I think it's this partnership between national organizations and state organizations that's going to be so important in that fight, because national groups, and it's what I've been, pulling together with partners, other national partners, and, other colleagues at the Bail Project, like a table to be able to do some of the work to create resources and support. You all are doing such critical work in the states to create resources and make it really easy to engage. But at the end of the day, Congress is going to want to hear from you. It's going to want to hear from your members, right? If we do have to put up the fight, the same way that grassroots organizers are always saying its constituents and its members that your state legislators want to hear from. Congress, I can go meet with Congress, but it's going to be a lot more impactful if state-based groups who provide the platform for these legislators to speak to constituents are saying, do not do this.
Let's talk a little bit about the racial disparities and about the role this plays in women's lives, because 3/4 of our women are moms in New York State. So when you incarcerate a mother, you are literally taking that mother away from being the caretaker for her children. We're here in Puerto Rico. I'm Puerto Rican, happy to be here. But let's talk about the fact that when I went to prison, I remember being shocked when I looked around and every woman around me was Black or brown.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they were white, but they were super poor.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the racial disparities are obviously extraordinary in the application of cash bail and who's impacted by them. And they're the ones that you see, sort of riddled throughout the criminal justice system.
Is this because judges are simply placing cash bail amounts based on what you look like?
I don't know that we don't have any data to say that, but I think the same way that we know that racism and discrimination is embedded in our criminal justice system overall, that plays out in bail setting and pretrial decision making. It's part of the reason that we push back so hard on risk assessment tools, for example. We know that people of color are far more likely to have a record that shows greater number of police contacts, a greater number of arrests, because we know that there's racial disparity and racial bias in policing. We know that
not because they're committing more crimes, exactly, but because they're being policed.
Right. Communities of color are heavily policed. People of color are more likely to be arrested. Again, not because they're committing more crimes, but because they are being targeted. And then we see that in the bail setting, it very likely could be because judges are, I haven't seen a study that says it very likely could be that there's racism that is happening in the bail setting process itself. And also, I think that what we do know is that rationale for setting bail higher or making a more stringent pretrial decision is going to be, well, look at all the times this person has been arrested. Well, this person has this record, right? So when we push back on risk assessments and said we want evidence and we want individualized decision making instead of an algorithm that is saying this person is dangerous or this person is likely to flee because they don't have a stable address, because they have a bunch of arrests, etc., those are all imbued with the same racism that the system is imbued with.
And you may not have the same address because you're living in a shelter, or maybe you've moved a bunch, or maybe there's a lot of reasons for this.
Right. But they equate that. They say that's a factor for flight, right? Or if you don't remember your phone number because your phone just changed, etc., they say, how are we going to get a hold of you to tell you about your court date?
That's actually a question they ask. That's crazy.
Yeah, in some of the tools, right? They've done a lot of work to get community feedback over the years, but that's why we push back so hard. And then to the question about how women are impacted, we know that women do not on average earn the same amount as men. So they are, even if bail setting was all other things equal, they are less likely to be able to make that bail. We do know that they tend to be the primary providers. We also know that on the flip side, they're more likely to be impacted by a man's incarceration. Women are more likely. I just saw a presentation by a woman who's doing really, really interesting research. Women are much more likely to be the co-signers for bail bondsmen. They're much more likely to put up that 10%.
Oh, wait a minute. So men are not bailing women out. Women are bailing men out.
Are you shocked? Are you shocked?
Let me get this right. Right.
And then when the man is incarcerated, they're doing all of the work of taking care of the family. And then there's like the emotional labor, right? I mean, I can't tell you how much emotional labor and how much carrying the emotional labor of like my brother's incarcerations over the years with my mother was, right? And to the point of like the calls and the money on the phone. You talked about how like horrible it was when you were incarcerated, not having access to discovery and all of that. Like I had no money at the time. I had to fly across the country because he didn't have access to discovery, because I lived out in New York at this point, right? Back to California to go through the 2,000 pages because he couldn't get it into jail. And like the jail he was in kept going on lockdown because the unit that he was in was like sort of popping off, etc. So these are things, and I'm using myself as an example because this is just my experience and I don't at all imagine it's out of the norm, right? But like these are all economic impacts on women who tend to be the people who step up to the plate.
The caretakers.
And are the caretakers.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I am in awe of, and I have always been in awe of your tenacity, your passion, and most importantly, what a beautiful, loyal sister, friend, community member you are. Like your heart is so big. And we need people like you, not just in the fight advocating, but with the lived experience. And we talk about this at New Hour all the time. Lived experience is so deeply critical because I can sympathize as much as I want, but if I haven't walked in your shoes and if I haven't taken time to even get to know what those shoes are like, it is so hard to not judge.
Yeah. And I think that is how, earlier when we were talking about how in people don't understand until they've lived it or it's happened to the person that they love. I think that when we feel ready and comfortable to talk about our experiences, or, you know, in my case, like my loved one was comfortable and I was comfortable, I think it's really important that we do that, right? I always talk about this study that Forward US put out a few years ago, maybe in 2018. It's called the Every Second Report. And it found that 1 in 2 adults in the United States have an immediate loved one, an immediate family member who is or has been incarcerated in the United States.
Wow.
That means that all of us, right? If you then take the rate of direct experience with incarceration and secondhand experience, almost all of us are impacted. And the more that we're comfortable sharing and moving, you know, sharing and healing, the more I think that we can get clear-eyed about the solutions, because we know what the answers are.
And I think you're raising actually the very reason why we're doing a podcast is most people have survived so much trauma and you just want to hide it. It's not something you want to talk to your neighbors about. It's not something that you're carrying it alone. And that stigma and shame is also on the backs of the family members. And so I think that the fact that we continue to have these conversations gives me hope, because it means that there's so much more that we can do with our experiences versus hiding them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the things I've always really been inspired by at New Hour. You create a really vibrant, open community that feels safe for women, for survivors of trauma, for survivors of harm, to move at their own speed, but to feel very connected. And I think that that is so critical, because I do think that, you know, obviously the experience of incarceration directly is very, very different, you know, and I think that we have to differentiate that. And also I think that it is really important to have spaces for family members also, and for those spaces to overlap when it's, you know, overlap and interconnect.
I think that I always say I created New Hour with a small group of volunteers, but really for selfish reasons, because when I came home from prison, I had no community that understood the trauma I had been through. And so fast forward to today, you're here in SOMOS, we're here at SOMOS, we're here in Puerto Rico. I'm going to ask you a question that is completely off topic.
Right.
You do a ton of traveling.
Yes.
You are a jet setter. You're all across the world doing amazing work. Tell me, what is your favorite travel tip that you think you should share with the rest of the world? Do you have a travel tip?
I do. Okay, can I give two?
Yes.
All right. You're not gonna like my first one, and I think you already know it. I think you already know.
Be on time for the airport, because I'm not.
It's not that, but that's a good one. Because if you miss your flight, you don't get to go.
I know.
I am a dedicated, no matter how long I'm going on a trip, I'm like a carry-on only girl. I'm a carry-on only girl.
I don't like this answer.
You knew it about me. But honestly, like, losing your luggage is the worst. And if you lose your luggage, you have to buy new stuff. And I promise you, hear it from me, I promise you, they don't actually pay you for the stuff you've lost. So you can pay to get your stuff washed if you need to get your stuff washed, and you deserve it because you're worth it. You should carry on only. Okay.
Wait. You will be proud of me.
You did.
Let the audience know. For the first time ever in all of my travels, I packed only a carry-on. I don't know how I did it.
It's amazing.
But it was actually really rewarding to get off that plane and just.
It's amazing. My second pro tip, but this is a good one. That probably anyone can and will take, is I always bring a really good like water bottle, like a metal water bottle, and then I'll stop like once I've gone through the gate, you know, or through security, I'll, stop and wherever I'm like getting a snack or whatever, I'll ask them to fill it with like ice and water or whatever, like at the bar, at the restaurant, or a lot of times they'll have the things to fill, at the airport. It's like a game changer on the flight because being dehydrated on or after a flight, like where you get off and you just feel like you're like the crypt keepers, not a way to start off your trip. So those are my two.
The reason I asked this of you is because you are both incredibly bright and bubbly and brilliant, and also I think really, really, really thoughtful and intentional about how you do the work. And so it seems like a silly question, but you didn't disappoint me.
Thank you.
Well, we can talk forever about these issues. I'd love to have you back on.
I would love to come back
and give Ziggy a big, big hug.
Yes, and Trooper too.
The dog.
We'll have to get them together sometime. Maybe they can be on the show the next time.
We'll put the dogs on the show.
We'll put the dogs on the show.
But Erin, thank you for everything you're doing at the Bail Project. And at New Hour, we are very much looking forward to continuing to create space where there is injustice. We want to see justice. And the Bail Project is dedicated to that. The amazing team you work with there and all of the work you're doing. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you too.
Thanks for joining.